Hey guys, Jason from JMACX here. Look, I wanted to do a video. There's a lot of questions through our office and through our facilities regarding the RAM DS GVM upgrade. So we obviously do the 4.2 tonne GVM upgrade, giving a 2,500 kilo rear axle rating, as opposed to the 1770 factory. So, you know, you're going up another 700 kilos odd. And people are going, oh, but I've had a brace fitted to my car, or someone's re-rated my axle, you know. But the problem is under state legislation, the re-rating of axles isn't compliant. So even under the Queensland 10%, you can't apply the Queensland % GVM upgrade by re-rating the rear axle. It's clearly stated in the Queensland Code of Practice. Many other states have the same thing, but you would have to talk to your independent state about that. But 100% in Queensland, because Queensland allow a 10%, you can't exceed the manufacturer's axle load rating under the Queensland 10%. It is not acceptable. So the biggest thing that we see is people going, well, if I weld or bolt a brace onto this car, I can up the axle rating. Obviously, if you do the testing and the evidence on these vehicles, doing all of that bracing through this housing doesn't fix anything. It's a waste of time. You're not doing anything to the vehicle. The problem is, it's coming from the factory bearing area. So it's not just the bearing itself, it's actually the area that contains the bearing as well. They become the weakest part of this differential. The problem you've got with welding, bracing and things like that, unless this car is stripped, removed, the diffs are stripped and removed from the car, it's put into a jig and it's done correctly, it's preloaded, all those sorts of things, preheated, you're going to get distortion. So all you're going to be doing is bending that rear axle, and then you're going to have premature bearing failure. So there's a lot of reasons why they can't be done in the car, and we're seeing a lot of people doing stuff in the car, and you just can't do it. It doesn't matter if it's one of these or a Land Cruiser or whatever. You've got to ensure it. We even find that some of these housings, as we pull them out of cars, they've already got slight deviation in them, and we have to like straighten them before we start. So that's a bit of the process. But probably what I wanted to clarify was a diff bracing won't do anything for you. If you come to us and you want your GVM upgraded and you've got a diff brace, for us, the housing is now no good. You know, as far as we're concerned, that housing is toast and you need to start again. So I'll go through what we do for the diff, and we've done this under all of our engineering evidence. And remembering that we're not raising these GVMs by 100 or 200 kilos or whatever the case. We're taking them up to 4.2 tonne. So that's around 750 kilos greater than the factory GVM, remembering that in the States it's 31. When the cars came here, they made them 3450. The maximum axle capacity is 3540, I think it is. So it's only about 90 kilos greater than the 3450 that they're given. So they're right at their limit. So they're the sorts of things you've got to consider about where's your axle safety rating gone now. And you know, it's okay while you run up and down the blacktop doing that sort of stuff, but it's when you start hitting washouts and corrugations and things like that. The other important thing to remember is, and we had a customer in here the other day who we'd done a 4200 GVM on his car, and he says, oh, but I'm 4180. Well, when we weighed that car with his caravan attached, he was 2.9 tonne on his rear axle. So he was so far overloaded, and you know, you've got to comply to the GVM, the GCM, the brake toe, and the axle capacities. If you don't tick any one of those boxes, then you're non-compliant. So you can tick the GVM box, but fail the GCM box, fail the toe capacity box, fail the axle box. Any one of those failures puts you at legal liability for insurance if you have an accident, and that's the reality of it. So you've got to remember, it's not about just your GVM and your GCM. You have to not exceed your axle capabilities. When they do the roadside checks and things like that, that's something that the police and that they check is axle loads, because that's how they weigh it. They weigh the front axle, they weigh the back axle, with your van connected and all your gear on board. So getting back to our diff brace scenario, and we'll pan over that. That is not an acceptable standard for a GVM upgrade from our perspective. We don't accept it, we won't use it. It doesn't do anything to make the diff stronger. So we'll get into now and we'll take this over to the bench and I'll just show you what we do as a comparison, and that's what we require to be able to get those axle loads to where you need them to be. An interesting part of when we did our GVM and we loaded our car, the 2,500 kilo rear axle load is what you need to achieve that 4.2 tonne. But as you can see by the other experience, the dude was 400 kilos over that again, so you can go massively the other way if you don't build your car or load your car correctly. So I'll wheel this over and we'll just have a look at the bearing setup. So what we've done here is we've cut a piece of your tube off the end of your axle here. As you can see, it's quite a heavy walled tube, so there's not really a major concern with it. Obviously it necks down here, which obviously it becomes weaker. However, the issue being is the thickness of the material around that bearing, that's where, and around this flange is where your weakness is. So it doesn't matter if you start welding braces and things all the way up the axle tube, it doesn't do anything to fix the problem. Now, looking at your bearing, that's a factory RAM bearing. Not much bigger than a Ford Falcon type bearing. They're just not there. And it's not that they're poorly designed as a vehicle, they're not designed as a load carrying vehicle. They're designed as a tow vehicle. So when you're towing, you don't have load on the rear axle, so they don't design them for that. So when we do our full float, this is our patented system that we've patented for the DS. It's a dual bearing, so this one's missing its outer, but basically you're putting two of those where that would normally go. So very, very small, and that particular bearing runs hard on the axle. So they're not designed for load carrying. So if you want to make these cars for load carrying, you need to upgrade your diff, but you've got to do it correctly. You don't, just throwing bits of plate at something doesn't make it stronger. The same thing we see with chassis. People just randomly welding plates on saying this will make it stronger doesn't necessarily equate to an engineering outcome. So if you've got questions about that, GVM, GCM, axle loads, I'd say for all you RAM guys that are running around and you're ringing us, the first thing we're going to tell you to do is we want you to get your GVM, get your tow, you weigh your caravan, weigh your car, so that's GVM, tow capacity, that'll give you what your GCM potentially is, but we also want front and rear axle loads because that is where the failures are coming from. So we get a lot of customers ringing up, buying replacement rear axles and things like that, factory ones, bent housings and things like that. So if you're going to go down that GVM path and you're going to use your RAM for that application, you need to do it correctly. So if you want any more information, go to jmax.com.au.